Good evening, Amanda. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How about yourself?
I'm excited to be here.
Good.
Always highlight of my week.
Awesome. How's Lake Galore?
It's pretty. It's a little warm, but not nearly as hot as Lake Norman.
Yes.
Lake Norman's like being on the surface of the sun this time of year. I was there early this morning before I left to come to work. My wife got out to try to beat the heat this morning, and she came back panting. You can't beat the heat there. It never, because the lake is so big and generates so much heat, and it lets it out at night. It just doesn't cool down at night, and even in the morning, it's it was 80 degrees this morning when we woke up.
Oh man.
At daylight. I mean, it never gets. Once the heat gets started in the summertime, it never gets below 80 at night. And it's just a constant beat down on the heat.
That's where we moved from. We actually lived in Mooresville before we moved to South Charlotte. But yes, traffic and heat, not fun.
Yeah, the traffic is brutal. Every day the traffic is bad. Now the express lanes have helped.
Yeah.
When I go home on Fridays, I come off of 85 onto 485 and go around the loop. And, I've got two segments, and usually, or is it three segments? It's usually about $10 for those three segments that are, less than 10 miles. About 8 miles that I travel, it's $10 for that generally. Some days it's more. But if you drove back and forth to Charlotte every day, it would be $25 or $30 a day just for tolls.
Yeah.
It's very
do you have the quick pass?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's still that expensive.
Yes.
At peak times, I mean, on Fridays afternoon, the segments are anywhere between $4 and $5 for each of the little segments. And so now if you didn't have a quick pass, it'd be about 15. Normally it's this week it was $9.20 for those three little segments that are about 3 miles each. And so it was $9.20. But it's around $10. But now if you don't have a pass, it's 15.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that can get it's still around, according to what time of day, still around $22 to $25 a day if you go all the way to Charlotte and back on it. It can go that far. So, yeah, but if you don't, you're just sitting in traffic, and that's no fun. It's that's just part of living in that part of the world, is the traffic and that ridiculous heat that comes off the lake all night and just keeps it's just so foggy and mildewy and damp all the time damp. Everything rots. The wood rots off your house, the trim. I mean, everything. It's just that way. But it's a pretty place to live. It's just hard to get in and out. That's the only thing. Well, welcome everybody. This is MELS 603, Section 03. This is your first night to get to be in charge. So we will have our case study 1 tonight. Before we do our case study, as you can see, I have brought up our weekly schedule. Please remember that our OMA Task 1, many of you have already done it, but our OMA Task 1 is due this Sunday night by 9. Just a quick reminder. All right, let's see what the chat. Somebody will want to go first, I know. Santana, Meredith, and I ate that. Okay, so she won't be able to be here tonight. But she did meet with y'all. All right, so Santana's not going to be here. Okay, prayers for her and her daughter. All right, so
Meredith and I can go first, though.
Yeah, well, that'd be good then. That's what I was just going to say. Do we have let me stop my share. Do we have a volunteer victim here? that wants to go first? All right, so go right ahead then.
Okay,
Share your
let
screen and
me-
let's get started.
All right. Is everybody seeing the Google Slides?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, so kind of the way we set it up is I created the PowerPoint just kind of as a template, and we've got a couple slides, just kind of course of action, going through kind of a summary of the case itself, and then we correlated it to those 4 ethical paradigms. So we'll just jump in, and if you have questions or comments, just wave a hand or jump in and stop us. So let me move ahead a little bit. So in this case study, as we all know, Bobby submitted a plagiarized assignment, and he was questioned about it, and his reasoning was that he did not have enough time due to his sports schedule. So therefore, he chose to turn in an assignment that his brother had done previously. So the biggest issue that we were looking at is that due process was not provided for Bobby, because the teacher decided she's going by the policy as she was interpreting it, and she dispersed her consequence or punishment without really going through the process of investigation and giving Bobby due process for the situation. And then we noted in our discussion last night that the teacher had also obtained a union representative to be on her side if the discussions were to continue, or if the principal was to go back on what her decision was.
We felt
Kaylee,
like
does
that was an important piece to know as you're the principal, like putting yourself in that mindset and considering, because I know there was a lot of attention brought in the case study to the high rank or the financial contributions that Bobby's family member had presented. But I thought it was important, or we thought it was also important to note the union representative, because that is a little bit of a signifier that additional problems could arise related to the teacher should the principal make a decision that errs in Bobby's favor.
Okay. So then we looked at arbitrary and capricious standards. Does the punishment or does the time fit the crime? So even though there is a school policy stated in the case study, the wording of the policy leaves a little wiggle room because of the word may. It does not say that the student shall fail or the student will fail. It says that they may receive a failing grade.
All
So
right,
that
so
leaves.
let me ask you a question there. Pardon my interruption. When
No,
it
go ahead.
says the student may fail, does that mean they may fail the assignment or may fail for the year?
We're kind of have that point in our next section about the principal really needing to investigate the grading policy, because having a single assignment weighted over 50% is pretty significant, and having
Is that legal?
I don't think so.
No, it's not. It's not legal to have one homework assignment can't be more than 50% of the final grade. And when it says cheating may result in a failing grade, what that means is on that assignment, how do we know that it doesn't mean for the year?
Right.
Federal law, which federal law says you can't do that? That would be zero tolerance. Zero tolerance are against the law. The law says that you can't just say, if you do this, you fail for the year or you're excluded for the year. So that's the first point that students always get hung on. Well, it says they may fail. No, it doesn't say they may fail for the year. They may fail the assignment. Now, and the way that works is if you fail the assignment, then you can't do double jeopardy. You can't fail the assignment and give them in-school suspension. You can do one or the other. You can give them a makeup and then do the maximum that your code of conduct calls for, which generally is 1 day of in-school suspension. But you can't do both, even there. But nowhere would anybody reasonably assume that failing an assignment of any kind would lead to a year exclusion. A
Where
failing grade.
did they, I know that in the last session, you had verbally discussed that exclusion from the extracurriculars, but it's not stated that that was a consequence in the case study.
Exclusion from what?
From the sports.
No, I've not mentioned sports.
Oh,
That has nothing to do with it. You
there
can't,
wasn't any exclusion from, there wasn't in-school suspension or anything that I read.
no, failing for the year is a 1-year exclusion from school. It's the same thing. You have to understand that. That's the maximum punishment that we can give, is to exclude you for a year. If a child fails the 8th grade and has to repeat the 8th grade, they can actually sit at home for the year and then come back in the 9th grade.
Would
So what has happened is the teacher has done a 1-year exclusion without any due process. That's why it's called a zero tolerance exclusion. You did this, you get that, you're out for a year. Those are illegal. Federal law, that's a violation of federal law, Office of Civil, that's a violation of student civil rights and the 14th Amendment. You can't just say, if you do this, you're out for a year. There is a long and very involved process. And you would have to do something like actually shoot another kid. Bringing a gun won't even get you a year exclusion. You would have to actually discharge the firearm and hit somebody to get a year exclusion from school. And this kid turned in his brother's homework and got a year exclusion from school.
He's not getting a year exclusion from school. He's failing social studies.
No, he's failing for the year, 8th grade. That's the same as an exclusion. That's what federal law says. It doesn't matter if you give, and federal law further goes on to say, even if you give him an alternative assignment like summer school or alternative school, it still does not erase the fact that you've excluded him from school for a year. That's federal law. That's not Dale's opinion.
I don't feel that I was necessarily set up to have that same revelation, because there isn't a place that states what grade he is in. And even for 8th graders, that is highly atypical. There's typically departmentalized grading.
No, he fails for the year. He fails the whole 8th grade for the year. That's the punishment that the teacher has imposed upon him, is he fails 8th grade for the year.
That's not stated explicitly in the.
Let's look and see. Let's look and see. Let me get out of that. Exit full screen. See what I've got here.
Yeah, when I'm kind of with Kaylee. I don't remember it specifically stating a grade that he was in. I assumed he was in high school, just because I guess I'm in high school, so I think sports and that kind of thing, that's just where my brain went to. And I guess I didn't correlate that if you are failed for a year, that's considered an exclusion. That makes sense, that's what it is. I've just never put it together like that. So I think that's where we were kind of confused with exclusion versus failing the class for the year, I guess is what we were saying, or where we were coming from with that.
Yeah, the information regarding scholarships also made it seem more aligned with high school. But even in 8th grade, I've never worked in a school where the grades were not departmentalized.
Dr. Lamb, our group as well agreed that we didn't take it as a final grade. We took it as just that assignment project.
Yeah, that's what the policy is, but what the teacher has interpreted that to is that he fails for the entire year and has to go to summer school. And so that's the whole issue here, that you have to kind of weed through and figure out what's exactly exactly what happened. Let's see. Playing grave cheating on assignments is probably can have more than half. But they have to be required to attend summer school. Says if it was consistent with the student handbook. Made it so, but the issue here is it's not consistent with the handbook. It only means that you can fail that assignment. It doesn't mean that you can fail for the year. Handbook, proceed with the dilemma. My advice, be careful, you know, kids, all these things go on. A lot of this stuff is meant to throw you off track. It'd be required to attend summer school, and so that would be generally a failure in 8th grade is the only time we do summer school except in a pandemic. And so you had to kind of figure that one out on your own as well, that he would be an 8th grader. He's not a high schooler. You can't fail for the year in high school. You can in elementary up through 8th grade. Now, many schools, as you said, many schools do it, departmentalize it, but that's not the law. The law is that that up through 8th grade, you can fail for the year and have to go to summer school. Now, again, things have changed a little bit during the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, only in grade 6, 8 could you fail and have to go to summer school. So that's what lets us know that he's an 8th grader. He's not a high schooler. If he were a high schooler, he would just fail this one and he would go right on and he could repeat it next year. But what she's saying is he fails for the year, and rather than repeat 8th grade next year, and that's according to zero tolerance, that's an expulsion for a year. The alternative that she's willing to offer is he can go to summer school. But federal law is still very clear on zero tolerance. Even if you offer an alternative, it's still an exclusion for the year. And you've not gone through all of the steps of due process. He's not had a hearing. We've not checked on policy. You can't make a homework assignment more than the most that a homework assignment in total can count for the year is 10% by state law. That's the most it can count. All of them in aggregate can only count 10%. How much does the state exam count, by the way? There's a law on that one. All these things there's a little wiggle room for the local, but the state sets these. How much can the state exam, what's the most the EOG or an EOC can count in North Carolina?
Is it 30%?
That's the most.
20,
that is correct.
20 to 30.
20 to 30. And who gets to decide whether it's 20 or 30? The teacher, the principal, the superintendent? No. Who gets to decide if it's 20 or 30? The school
The
board.
local board.
That is correct. The local board gets to decide whether it's 20 or 30. And then you have local assessments. How much can they count? Like the quarterly test that a lot of you do. How much can they count? Anybody know?
Like the North Carolina check-ins
Yeah.
for elementary
The
school.
local assessments. Yeah, the local assessments.
We don't count ours as any, and I don't believe that you can.
Some of those in elementary you can't, but in the upper grades and the middle grades, you can count them up to 20%. Again, all this is spelled out and has to by law be given to you as a teacher when. Where's it
Beginning of
got to
the year.
be and when you got to get it.
You have to have it at your opening meeting.
That is correct. And it has to be embedded in what document?
Teacher handbook.
Teacher handbook. That is correct. We have the same policies in state colleges, and even private colleges have adopted them. So what is on my course overview page?
Grading policy.
The grading policy. That is correct. That is a contract.
So in the case study, Dr. Lamb, so in the case study, it is intentional that there's a hiccup to kind of contradict each other in the case study, because it says that she's giving him a failing grade for cheating on the assignment.
Yeah, and she's making the assignment count more than half of the yearly grade. That's your clue that he's failing for the year. This is his yearly grade for 8th grade.
Okay.
She's failing him in the 8th grade for the year for cheating on this one assignment.
How much can a project count legally? Because it says it's a project.
Again, it's home. What would be now? Again, that this in-class project. This is a out-of-class homework assignment. Most they can count is 10%. That's the most. Some districts don't count homework at all. When I was principal in Burke County, we did not count homework. We didn't count it any. You can count it anywhere up to 10%, but no more than 10. A lot of districts don't count it any in the final grade.
Yeah, a lot of places will have conversations about whether or not homework creates equitable outcomes.
It doesn't. We know that. Absolutely. I was not one of the people who pitched a fit and yelled and screamed when accountability came in. We had a lot of old school principals at that time in 1991 when accountability came in that screamed and yelled about homework. And I was like, you don't get it. I was at a Title I school. Our kids didn't have a quiet place or a safe place or anybody at home to help them. Why would we grade them on that? Basically, we're grading their home life. That's what homework does. It grades your home life. Well, all mine's gonna fail. I've got 900 kids, and you know they're all Title I. They're all free and reduced lunch. What are you talking about? So to make it equitable, a lot of districts have stopped counting homework at all in the final grade.
So Dr. Lamb, I have a question. And it's only because you're talking about homework, and I talked with a young lady yesterday who's in middle school, and she was saying that if she is not allowed to have homework,
Right.
because the teacher, if she takes the work home and the teacher finds out that her parents have helped her, the teacher will give her a 0 on her homework.
Yeah, because again, that just amplifies the inequities. I mean, what if you don't have anybody at home that can do your homework for you? And so that's what we're talking about here. All of this is embedded in grading policy.
So
North Carolina General Statute 115C 288A, the very first one. According to state law, who's supposed to know all this stuff and actually assigns the final grade? Who in the school
Principal.
does that? That would be the
Principal.
principal. That's why this is your first case study. You better know that grading is going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue every day in every level of schooling that you're at, especially as the further you get along in the process. You better know all the ins and outs of grading. You better know what policy is. You better have it. You better cover it with your faculty. The very first faculty meeting, you're required to do that. It better be in your faculty handbook. You better know how to interpret this stuff. You better know what a 0 tolerance expulsion is. That failing is the same as that according to federal law. There's no difference. And then if you created a disciplinary infraction and got put out for a year, or if you failed for the year, in the eyes of the law, that is the same thing. We could sit and argue whether it should be or not. It doesn't matter. Federal law says it is. It's the same thing. And even if you offer an alternative like summer school or alternative school, it's still a year-long exclusion. And if you do that, the law does not say that you can't exclude a kid for a year. It says that there better be a good reason, and you better give them due process, and you better have exhausted every step of the appeal along the way. But they're guaranteed to, by the way. If you move for an exclusion of a kid, give them a 10-day suspension, which is required by law. If you give them a 10-day and ask for an exclusion, they automatically get every level of appeal. Automatically. It's not, did the parents want to appeal? No, the appeal is in place. Whether the parents ask for it or whether they show up, it does not matter. It must pass every level of appeal all the way through. So that it's not you do this, you get that. That's what 0 tolerance means, is if I do this, you get that, and there's no extenuating, there's no appeals, there's no evidence, there's no right to present your case. The punishment doesn't have to fit the crime, the whole deal. That's capricious, by the way. Questions?
Dr. Lamb, how does that correlate to standards-based grading?
I don't know that I don't know that it does. I mean, we're not saying you turn in work and we give you a grade based on the work. What happened in this case was we made something that should have counted probably less than 1 point of the final grade count more than 50% of the final grade for the year. It's not, you know, is this work a 70? Is this work a 60? What she said was, is you're failing for the year on a homework assignment. And the question is that legal? Is it ethical? Is it capricious? Does it violate the standards of due process? Does it violate the zero tolerance policy that you can't put a kid out for a year without going through all of the appeals and all of the hearings? What in this case, she said, Bobby, you failed for the year, and ran to her union rep. Now, who Bobby's parents are is immaterial. How much money they gave or what positions they hold, again, that was just there to try to confuse you. This is not a political case. This is a due process case, and it's also a case of not following law and policy by the teacher to make a homework assignment count more than 50% of a grade.
I think we spent a good bit of time discussing the fact that there should have been proactive things in place that stopped this situation from occurring well before. I know I've worked primarily in elementary schools, but we've had to submit things like what's our playground plan going to be? And I imagine in a school, if you had a grading policy, you would also need to submit that. You have to submit your lesson plans. So
of course,
communicated out that a homework grade would be weighted this high, and no one said anything up until that point. There should have been some proactive measures prior.
Well, what has happened here is, you know, one of the things that, again, on changing your lens here is, this is not a case where the administration did something wrong. This is not a case where there wasn't knowledge of the policy or any of those things. This is a case where a teacher punished a kid capriciously because he's been in pain and behind all year long, or we can just assume that. But this is a personal vendetta that this teacher has against this kid. There is no cover for her on this. There is no excuse. There is no, well, she probably didn't know this, or we could have done this. Teacher, and this is what teachers do sometimes. Now, again, I've been married to one for 37 years and I love her, but now that all teachers are not saints. Sometimes they do things like this. We read it in the paper every day, where, you know, they went too far. You know, she's fed up with him and his behavior, and her class is second and baseball is first. And so when she got the opportunity, she took her shot. This is what happens. This is what happens in real life, folks. This is what you will have to do as a school administrator. You'll have teachers who misbehave, who say inappropriate things, who do inappropriate things, who try to do backdoor things like this. This is you will, when you leave the classroom, you will no longer be working with students every day. You'll be working with adults, and this is the kind of behaviors that adults unfortunately exhibit on a pretty regular basis. I'm afraid to tell you, maybe not this one, but there's always something going on in schools where somebody's doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or not doing something that they should, and that's what they hire you for.
So Dr. Lamb, I have a question. So if the case was different, like he cheated on an exam, would it be a different course? Because you're saying because it was homework, that's what how the teacher got in trouble. But if it was an exam that he had to take that was 30% of his grade, I mean, I guess still no, but
still no. You can't, even if it was the state exam, she couldn't make it be worth more than 50%. By state law, how much can it be?
30.
The most is 30.
Right.
And the district can decide anywhere. It can't be less than 20. And And the district, when I say that, the school board decides what the grading policy will be. And so even if this had been this, the 8th grade EOG, she still couldn't give him a 0 and make it count more than 50% of his grade. So let's explore that one for just a minute. What happens if a kid cheats on a state exam? What has to happen then?
The misadministration, and they have to retake it.
That is correct. And you would do whatever the handbook says in terms of disciplinary action, 1 day in school, 1 day out of school, whatever it is. Because you have to give it to them again, would be misadministration. You cannot deny them the right to take the state exam. Even if they're the ones who messed up and cheated the first time, you still got to give them the exam again. You can't withhold that exam. If you could, then 2/3 of the kids in the state would never see the exam because their test scores killed us. That's just the way it works. Early on, and you folks are, you're probably not old enough to remember the early years of accountability. That was one of the tricks that schools did. They'd find ways not to test kids. I'm talking about just ridiculous stuff. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2. There was a high school in an adjoining district when I was a high school principal. They wouldn't have kids take, back then, what is it? ELPSA, the 9th grade history course that counted on your state report card. They wouldn't let kids take it to the 11th grade. There was a high school that would not let them take 9th grade history until 11th grade. Why not? By that time, the ones who were old enough had dropped out by then. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that folks have done to manipulate grading. Not test this kid, tell that kid don't show up to school tomorrow. I mean, I've seen it all. One of the things that I had to do in one of my jobs was, unfortunately, monitor stuff like this, bad behavior of folks who figured, who were always trying to figure out how not to test some kids. Now, one of the districts that I worked in did just the opposite. One of the things that they would do is they would tell our best students that every time you took the SAT, your score would go up 100 points to try to get the best students to take it every year. Why'd they want to do that? What'd that do to our district average? It inflated our district average about 100 points over what it should have been by having these kids we had kids take it 4, 5, 7, or 8 times. Now, the truth of the matter is you take it once, do a prep course, and all it does is teach you how to take the test better. Take it a second time, and you can expect up to 100 points. After that, regression to the mean catches you, but they're still scoring way above the average score in your district, but their scores do not go up the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th time you take it. They generally start coming back down. So I've seen that as well. Whereas a district, we had guidance counselors, running these kids down the hall, take this test again. You scored over 1,000, our average score around here is about 950. Every kid that scored over 1,000, they want them taking it every time it was offered. Well, that's just cheating too. Certain kids, you be out that day, or we'll make sure we suspend this kid for his behavior so he's not here at test time. Or we'll not offer that course until you're in a certain grade, or we'll make you wait till you're in the 10th grade to take biology. So we make sure that you've had plenty of time to drop out if you're going to before you take it. Or we'll move you right before test time into a course that doesn't count. There was a county that did that. It's actually the one where Gardner-Webb is located. What they did across the board in their high schools is every course that was going to count on their report card, kids that were failing at midterm, they dropped them into a lower level course that didn't count on the report card. They moved them from biology back down to physical science. And 40% of those kids dropped out that year. And they had the highest unemployment rate in Cleveland County for the next 2 years of any county in the state because they did that. They just flushed them. So grading is an issue. Who takes the test, when, what grades they get, all these things, you got to know what the policies are, what you can and can't do. And you got to be careful that teachers, you got to be monitoring what they do, because they're very likely to pull a stunt like this. If they've got a kid that's been a pain all year long, when they see their shot, some of them will take it. That's just human nature. You just got to settle in, and you just got to understand this is a case about a bad actor, a teacher that did something harmful to a child. I'm not saying that he wasn't a pain in the behind, but what I'm reminding you all is, number one, you got to be champions for children. And number two, kids that need love the most sometimes deserve it the least. That's what you've got to remember. This is simply a case of a teacher did a bad thing and knew she did a bad thing, and sought aid and comfort from a union to try to cover and to try to dig in and say, you know, you can't touch me. I did this bad thing. I broke the law, but you know, I'm protected. No, you're not protected if you break the law. Nobody can give you permission to break the law. The union can't. If we had a union in North Carolina or South, we don't. But if we had one, they wouldn't protect you if you violated federal or state law. You got to remember that piece of it too. If you violate the law, nobody can protect you. Nobody can give you permission to break the law. But this is a simple case that the teacher broke the law in a big way, not a little bit. And that's what this case is over the top in terms of a homework assignment, failing for the year over a homework assignment, making a one homework assignment count more than 50% of the final yearly grade. That you should hear bells going off. You should hear a siren in bells that something's wrong with this. He never got any kind of due process, never had a hearing, no nothing. Yeah, this one should have, you know, you should have heard sirens going off. You should have heard bells. This should be clear to you that this teacher has acted inappropriately.
So I'm just wondering, when we're talking about, or when you mentioned earlier that, you know, it's not that we've caught the principal not doing something correct. But if the case study said that this was an assignment she had done years before. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that it's not necessarily that the principal did anything wrong, but it had never been an issue before. So they didn't look closely enough to know she had assignments that were breaking the law.
The assignment didn't break the law. That she decided that this one assignment was going to count more than 50% is where the law was broken. Not that she gave the assignment. Now, there are some bad assignments. You know, making kids carry flour sacks around like they're babies. That's a bad assignment. Hopefully that's been discontinued everywhere, but that was a thing 40 years ago to try to combat teen pregnancy. You know, make kids carry a sack of flour around. You know, that was supposed to make them not want to have sex and have kids out of wedlock. I don't think it worked, but that's just my opinion. But we stopped doing that. I don't know what carrying a flour sack around has to do with having a baby. They have robot. Kelly says they have robot babies now, but that's the whole point. So I would argue that I'm not sure that the efficacy of that homework assignment. There's nothing wrong with the homework assignment that she gave. The problem is what she then did when a kid turned in his brother's paper. Therein lies the problem. That's where the problem starts. Nothing wrong. I mean, if your district allows for homework or out of class assignments, whatever you want to call them, the state says they're homework, by the way. Anything that's completed outside of the scope of the normal classroom is called homework. That's a fairly clear state definition, because we get into people, you know, wanting to argue, well, this isn't a class assignment. No, a class assignment's done in class. Anything that's done outside of class is called homework. Homework can only count 10% in aggregate of the total. And as I said, most districts have gone away from it counting anything at all because of access and who you got, you know, that can help you with it. And especially the digital divide, a lot of homework assignments. What if you don't have an internet, or, you know, nobody goes door to door selling encyclopedias anymore? And what if you don't have the internet? You don't have the same opportunity to complete that assignment as your classmate sitting next to you who has internet at home, or, you know, their mama saved F's and H green stamps and got them a set of encyclopedias. Y'all aren't old enough to remember that. When I was a kid, you saved green stamps from the grocery store and got a few encyclopedias. But neither of those happens anymore. So if you don't have the internet now, or if you don't live in a town that has a good public library nearby, you don't have the same access. I'm partnered with a little school up in the northern part of Cleveland County. They only have 200 students. And we've been doing a one-to-one initiative on Chromebooks. But our problem is even though we can get the Chromebooks, they can't take them home. Why can't they take them home? Because none of them have internet. It is such a rural place in the middle of nowhere. None of them have internet. So they become classroom sets of Chromebooks where they can work on them at school. No need to send them home. They just be paperweights at home. If you don't have an internet, Chromebook's not much good if you don't have an internet. And so that's real, folks. That's every day. That's in 2022. The pandemic just brought to fore what we already knew. I mean, we've been working on this one-to-one initiative at Kaiser Elementary since 2017. 3 years prior to the pandemic, we knew that they had a digital divide there that we were trying to do. We didn't need a pandemic to tell us that none of them had internet. And that's the case in a lot of places. So homework is kind of an outmoded exercise. And that's part of what the notion here is. Something as insignificant as homework failing the kid for the year. When there is a policy in your code of conduct that says, you know, if you cheat or if you plagiarize or whatever, it's a disciplinary infraction. It should not be a grading issue. That's another thing. So let's look at that right quick. Let me stop your share and let me share my screen right quick. I want to show you this piece. Let me share my screen. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead here. 6, 5. All right. This is next week. So here is a code of conduct for the second largest district in the state. Some years it's the largest. So this is their code of conduct. Again, who adopts the code of conduct for the district? Schools, principals, superintendent, or Board of Education?
The board.
The board adopts the student code of conduct. So let's see what it says that if you turn in your brother's paper happens to you. Cheating is an honor code violation. That's the UB, that's the state code. Violating rules of honesty and honor codes, including but not limited to plagiarism. That would be the case here. And so tier 1 responses, does it say anything about that you could be punished on your grade for doing that? That would be no. Nowhere in this code of conduct for cheating, turning in somebody else's plagiarism, that's turning somebody else's work in. It says the most you can do is a tier 1 response. So let's go see what a tier 1 response could be. See what that would be. See if that says that we can fail you for the year. Tier 1 provides programs and our school options for students who are at risk for behavioral issues and may be disenfranchised from school or commit minor infractions on an infrequent basis. Program are typically implemented at the school's current school, include services support related to anger management, conflict resolution. All right, so here are the things that you can do.
So in CMS, if you copy somebody else's test exactly,
Yep,
you get an A and the
Yep.
teacher looks and you both get an A, you're still going to get an A on that assignment, even though you didn't do anything.
you have to resubmit the assignment.
Okay.
You have to resubmit the assignment, just like you have to retest if you cheat on a state test. So here are the things. What is the most that you, if you look at this list, what is the most, do you see anything on here about failing? You see anything that's academic? No. The most you see is in-school suspension, and that would be 1 day. That's the most that you can do. You can read the list. You saw what it says the most you could do is. Now, repeated infractions, you can move to tier 2 on repeated infractions. This is it.
What does it mean by disciplinary councils, the last bullet underneath tier 1?
DTM, same thing as going to your intervention team.
Okay.
You can be referred to your intervention team. That is correct. That school-based committee, SBC, that's what the state calls them. SBCs or councils. You can just, they can just refer you to the intervention team. Remember, intervention teams for what 2 things? Academic and or behavioral issues. And this is a behavioral issue. So you can be referred to your intervention team that we talked about last week. But you see how this, you see what this is: restorative justice, community referral to a community agency, revocation of school related privileges, intervention team, see right there, referral to intervention team, behavior contract, after school detention, bus suspension, return of property or restitution, social restriction, peer mediation, verbal warning, counseling, conference. In-school suspension is the most. 1 day of in-school suspension for turning somebody. Now, usually districts have a policy on, they have to be given a makeup assignment. Now, some districts, they have to redo it. Some districts say that they can only get a 70 on it. Some say an 80 something. Some don't say, don't limit the score on that redo assignment. But on plagiarism, you cannot double jeopardy. You can't give them like a day of in school and, you know, fail them on that. You have to give them an alternative assignment. Now, some districts will do, if you turn it in, you get a 0 on that. Okay, but you don't get the in-school suspension. This particular school district says no academic penalty, just a disciplinary penalty. We could debate whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that's what it is in CMS. You need to know what, again, that's one of the things that I'm going to scream and yell and beat my hands on the desk about next week. You got to know what your code of conduct says. You got to know what the infractions are, and you got to follow that thing to the T. That's going to be when you start filling out, doing interviewing your AP and about discipline and due process. That's one of the things that's one of the takeaways I'm going to remind you on, is you got to follow the code of conduct, period. Otherwise, you'll get hit with a charge of arbitrary or capricious. What is arbitrary? Again, me and Amanda's out back smoking. Meredith catches us. She sends Amanda back to class and she shoots me. Well, that's arbitrary. She decided to punish me and not punish Amanda. Now, where's the capricious part? That's arbitrary and capricious. What's the capricious piece? That's more punishment than the crime. Don't you think shoot me is a little excessive for smoking? I'm not a smoker, but even if I were, that would seem a little excessive to shoot me for smoking. So the point of this case is this person has literally shot this kid, given him the most punishment that you can give, which is a 1-year exclusion. There is no expulsion from public school. After a year, an axe murderer can apply to come back after 1 year. You don't have to take them back, but they can apply to come back. The most you can put a kid out of school for is a year. And again, in the laws and you know, and the Office of Civil Rights says that failing a kid for the year is the same as excluding them for the year. That's what we've done for years, is we've done things like that to kids, especially in underserved communities. We've done things like that. We have failed them for the year. And that contributes to dropouts and, getting them to not come to school and take tests and do those kinds of things. And so in the eyes of the law, the Office of Civil Rights legislation, failing a kid for the year is the same as if you suspended, or we don't call it a suspension. If it's more than 10 days, we call it an exclusion. If we exclude them for a year or we fail them for the year, the same thing has happened. The same thing is that kid has a year pause in their educational attainment. What happens to kids that fail for the year or excluded for the year? What are the chances of them ever graduating from high school? What's the percentage? Anybody know? About 12%. That means 88% of the kids who fail for the year or excluded for the year never graduate from high school. That's pretty much that's pretty definitive, isn't it? Probability is pretty high. Maggie, I'm gonna pick on you for a minute before we get back to our case study. What's the policy for plagiarism or cheating in Henderson County schools? Do you know?
I don't offhand. It just made me think though, but I mean, just realistically, I was just thinking about this case study. It's a little dated because if we failed every kid for a class who copied and pasted something off the internet,
Yeah.
I mean, every senior is doing a research paper. I mean, we've had so many English teachers. I mean, the kid just either had to redo it or failed that assignment. But I mean, cheating, it's a whole new thing now. It's so easy to do that you couldn't possibly, regardless of what the law, I mean, realistically, you'd be failing kids right and left for
Every kid. You'd
And
fail
you can't
every
even-
kid nowadays. That's exactly
and it's
right.
hard to even prove it. So
That's exactly right. We'd have to put every piece of work that a kid turns in, we'd have to create drop boxes and turn it in. Plagiarism checks on everything, and even we even have an allowance for that. You folks probably don't know it, but when you do your turn it ins for for the OMA, I'm the one who sets that. I know what it's going to be set at. You can match up to 40%, and we don't even blink an eye. It's like swallowing a gnat in the summertime. We don't even notice it. Just go right on. I mean, that's just part of the game now. You got to understand that. Cheating can't be an academic thing where you punish kids over it. It just has to be a disciplinary thing that you do whatever you're going to do and move on. You won't even hear back from me. As long as y'all come in at 40 or under, you'll never even hear from me. Submit, go. That's just part of it. And one of the things that even my doctorals, I've got 6 that are finishing this summer. They're doing their final 6. They get up to 20% on their dissertation. By policy at Gardner-Webb, they can have up to 20% matching in their dissertation. 20%. So Maggie's exactly right. This does not fit the times that we're in. This is completely unrealistic for the times that we're in. She's right. This case study is dated. This came out in 2014, and I don't know when it was written before that. But this one is very dated in the notion that we're going to fail a kid for the year over somebody turning in his brother's homework assignment is not realistic. This teacher has just completely lost her grip on reality, on what authority that she has. That's what the notion here. And the big question is going to come later on, by the way, on that. So let's get back to our presenters here. Wow me.
You're muted, Meredith.
Sorry, I just realized that. Can everybody see the screen again?
Sure.
Okay, so we went through and looked at the 4 paradigms, and the first one was justice. And so as our kind of discussion has led throughout the class tonight, it was clear that he was not afforded justice because this is what happened, done, over with it, and the teacher was not going to hear any discussion over it. And now the principal's having to figure out what to do. So without giving him the opportunity to explain, have any kind of investigation, he was not afforded justice. And then we also, looked at that grading policy again to make sure that assignment weights are appropriate and allowed for the district, and now we know for the state as well.
So when we talk about he should be given due process, part of due process is we have to go, let's go to the manual. During that due process, first thing we'd look up is, all right, what's the most we can give Bobby here? Even if Bobby pleads guilty to this, what's the most? And so by not following the code of conduct, you have also violated his due process right. Due process, again, there's 2 parts of it, remember. There's the substance. What does it say you get for cheating? And then there's the procedure. What do you actually give Bobby for cheating? So we have we as I said, use the one from CMS. So we have what our due process is in terms of what's supposed to happen, anywhere from telling Bobby don't do it again to all the way up to 1 day of in-school suspension. Is that what the teacher did? No, then he didn't get his due process. We had it established what the substance is. It's a tier 1 infraction. Punishment goes from basically nothing, don't do it again, to 1 day of in-school suspension. That's the range. That's what due process says the substance of this infraction is. The actual procedure was you're out of school for a year. And even again, Office of Civil Rights is very clear. Even if you offer an alternative placement at an alternative school or summer school, that does not erase the fact that you excluded the kid for the year. That you can't say, well, but I gave him this. When we plea bargained it down to this, so he's no, you still gave him the year. You still failed him for the year. Can't do that.
Our district has a notebook that each principal has, and it takes everything in the code of conduct and it breaks it down where, like you said, for cheating, we look it up and we read what the code of conduct says, and there's a whole matrix that says exactly what you can and cannot do for that. So depending on how it's coded and written up is how our county goes through to look at
Absolutely
what the process is going to be from there.
And there's a person in your district that principals are encouraged to call and said, this is what the kid did. What do you think about this punishment? Do you think that will be supported by the board? And when it goes to the hearing, there's going to be a due process hearing. The representative of the superintendent is going to come out and do that. And the superintendent and it's going to write an opinion. Do you think it'll be supported at that? Yeah. All right. Then it's going to go to the board automatically. Well, do you think it'll be supported at the board level? No, I don't. I don't think they can go that far. I think the superintendent will be with you, but I don't think the board will. Because unfortunately, I was the person who answered those calls when I was a deputy for a lot of years. I don't think that they'll go for that. I just don't. You're better off going with this so it won't get reversed down the line. Now I'm gonna pick on Maggie again. Maggie understands that every disciplinary infraction that she handles and processes and every consequence that she assigns may be appealed by who to who at the school level. Parents can appeal anything that Maggie does to who?
The principal.
That is correct. They automatically have that right in North and South Carolina. Every decision that she makes, the principal has to review and say, yes, I support that, or no, I think I'll go. So when it gets something kind of controversial, Maggie's a smart person. I've already figured that out. So what does she do before she assigns that consequence? What might she pick the radio up and do? Consult with her principal. Absolutely.
Always.
Absolutely. You don't want to get into a situation where you're the bad guy always and the principal's having to reverse everything that you do. You know, whatever the principal can go with, that will be it. But the principal has to go with what the deputy superintendent's going to go with, and then the superintendent, and then the board. Everybody all the way, I mean, due process, they can appeal all the way up to the board. And if they don't get relief there, they can actually file a civil lawsuit. You just don't operate in isolation here. That's not the way that's not the way it works. So you as AP, when you get your AP job, just like when you're Maggie, your principal can overrule anything that you assign. And then I could, and when I was superintendent, I can overrule whatever principal does. And then the board can overrule me. You've got to understand that's why there is a range of things. There is a range, and you have to be, you're trying to match the
All right.
consequence with
We good
the
to move on?
action. That would be capricious.
I think we lost him.
that
Okay,
we
oh
ha-
no, there he is.
There he is.
that we haven't given more than we should have. We can't give more than the law allows, number one, and number two, we got to use some good judgment. Says my signal is unstable again tonight. A little storm up outside, but I think we're okay now. All right, continue on. But make sure
Okay.
you understand due process also, again, it has two functions. What you were supposed to do and then what you did. That would be substantive and procedural.
So the second ethical paradigm is care, and it's talked about relationships relating to care. And so the relationship between Bobby and this teacher is clearly fractured. And staff-student relationships are important, as well as school community relationships. And we kind of discussed that the issue should be solved without sway from community leaders or athletics. Whatever is right has to be done as right, not because somebody's going to throw a fuss later. So we kind of took that bait for the dean of students and the superintendent, saying, hey, be careful, his uncle gives a lot of money and it could be an issue. He's very outspoken. You have to put that to the side and do what is right for your student, your teacher, and your school, is what we were looking at for this one.
Yep.
Okay. And then we move into critique. So the superintendent and the dean of students, as I said, were concerned about repercussions, but regardless of the fact, they have to have adequate due process to determine if the current consequence is appropriate. And if it's not, then it needs to be changed. So the fact that Bobby was a star athlete and he could help with scholarships for other students and all of that was thrown in there, that should have nothing to do with the right or wrong of the situation. Okay. Kaylee, jump in if I miss anything. And then for profession, so we discussed that you go back and look at the actual policy, like, you know, you just pulled up for CMS. What does the district say? What does your school say? And make sure that everything is being enforced properly and that things are weighed correctly. And again, he should be given his due process, and then he should be based on his policy on how he is doing and not the athletic status. That shouldn't be in it at all.
I can wrap up, like Meredith, since you've been talking a whole bunch.
Okay.
So after we went through the ethical paradigms, I'm just talking about the solution. The biggest thing, obviously, being an investigation into the current policies and making sure that he gets that due process, that right is in place for him. We discussed how the athletic status should not be contributed within part of the plagiarism ruling, but however, the ultimate solution really is the need for that investigation into the policy and the need for that due process. And we included some indicators in here from some of the other court cases that kind of backed up those. And then we also talked about, I think this was one thing that has kind of led to a lot of the discussion that we've had tonight, has been some of the questions that we had. And so as a principal or an administrator, you're gonna understand these relationships that like your teachers and students have with each other and how different people's personality. So you'll have a lot of background knowledge that we didn't necessarily have reading a case study so much. And so we were looking at different questions that we would consider as we were investigating as the principal. Some things that weren't as clear to us. And then once you get the answer, you can make more informed decisions. Was whether or not he was receiving a failing grade and the punishment of not participating. We weren't sure if it was super clear. It sounded like the reason why he wasn't participating in the athletics was because he'd have to attend summer school, but it did kind of border on the line of double jeopardy as far as there being sort of a consequence. As well as the grade. Is there a precedence already for this? So was due process followed for non-athletes, and then what was like the outcome of a similar situation if one was there? Again, not appropriate for one grade to be 50%, and even sort of a little bit more ridiculous, just as a sidebar, is that it's a social study. It's not even a testing subject, it's social studies. And if there is a weighted grading process, graded policy, so for example, we recognize that like 50% is not an allowable amount for one assignment to be in place, but was that weighted grading communicated to everyone at the start? So theoretically, if it was a more appropriate weighted grading scale, was that communicated appropriately so that students and families were aware of how much each assignment was worth? And then we also talked about the policy in place for submitting late assignments, because we discussed it potentially being more appropriate to make him redo the assignment. So if what he submitted, it was plagiarized, they could use late submission policy as the basis for him being able to submit the assignment again.
Great. That kind of wraps up what we had put together for the case itself.
It's good. Good. You can stop your share. I want to share my screen right quick. Move some of this stuff out of the way. All right, so some of the background here. If you read chapters 6 and 8, a lot of this stuff, procedural standards of arbitrary and capricious. And I told you specifically to make sure you understood zero tolerance, those kinds of things. But let you struggle on this one, because what you've got to learn is that you've got to pull disparate pieces from different places. There's not going to be a manual that says if A, then B. If this happens, it's all clean and clear. You've got to know, okay, what is grading policy? Can't blame the principal because that's standard from the district. It's covered the first day. Every school is required to do that. What does it say? What is the law on grading policies? All these, you had to pull all these different pieces together. But that's what administrators have to do. It's never clean and clear. It's never just, oh, okay, this happened, I do that, I move on. Very, very few cases like that. There's always multiple pieces and parts And in a case like this, and it gets compounded by you have a faculty member who, for whatever reason, loses their grip on reality and does something that's crazy. Now, I'll say this. The district that I'm sitting in right now, I'm in the very northwestern corner of Rutherford County. I was a high school teacher here more than 40 years ago in this district, the high school that serves here. There was three kids that came along in about a 5-year span. A brother and a sister, and then a younger brother a couple years later. The first 2 kids that came along couldn't have been better kids. The first boy and the girl. They were wonderful children, wonderful students, wonderful people, involved in activities, clubs, organizations. They were just the finest kids you could ever have in a high school. Both of them, great scholars, the whole deal. Just like this family, how lucky can you be to have 2 kids this perfect? Well, they paid for it with that third one, though. Good Lord. He was just a dumpster fire from day one. Dishonest, unethical, lazy, bully. I mean, just was the most privileged kid you've ever been involved in. And what made it so hard dealing with him was, and you can't help but do this, is comparing him to his brother and sister. And you kind of get fed up. I mean, I get it. I mean, I'm not excusing the teacher's behavior, but I kind of get it, especially if you've had a previous sibling who was all that, and then you get this one who is just, oh my Lord. I had the oldest boy first, and then I had the daughter, and then I saw and I asked, yeah, these are my brother, and oh boy, I've got another one of these. I've got another one of these McSwain kids. Boy, I'm so happy and excited about that until I got him. And then he was like the worst student I ever had. And probably, truthfully, he might not have been that bad, but in comparison to his brother and sister, it would drive you crazy. So you kind of get a sense of why an overreaction like this could happen. I kind of identify with this case. I mean, I want to strangle that third kid every day. How can you not be like your brother and sister? But that was probably unfair as well, that I expected him, to be the same kind of student that his brother and sister were, but he wasn't. And it was really hard to take. That does not excuse the teacher's behavior, but you can kind of see how these kinds of things can happen. All right, who's next up tonight? Amanda, you going now?
Yes, sir. It'll be
Go.
Brittany, Tara, and Tiffany.
All right. When you get to your opening slide, freeze so I can write everybody's name down, so I'll make sure I get you in the right order next time.
All right, can I go ahead and share my screen?
Absolutely. I can turn my camera off if that'll help. Yeah. Okay, I think you're good.
I think yeah, let me go
All
to the
right,
top.
so
Can everybody see it?
Okay, give me 1 second, AM.
Oh, no, hang on. There we go. Can you see it?
Tiffany, I can. All right, you can go now.
Okay. So we started with the duty of building administrator, just kind of quoting that they are to enforce compliance with the federal, state, and local laws, and enforce established school policies, procedures, and rules to ensure the safety and well-being of students while they are at school. And then we kind of added our thoughts on what we thought the principal should do. Like the first group with Meredith and Kaylee, we kind of were thinking the same thing as them, as far as it being a project, not a homework assignment. So I think, our thinking was incorrect in the same way that theirs was. But some of the things that we thought the principal should do would be that he needed to review the student handbook himself to make sure, that it was stated clearly in there what was to be done in this type of incident. We also mentioned that the teacher, Jane, should make sure that she has explained what plagiarism is and consequences of plagiarism if that's a separate item on the student handbook, and make sure that they understand, the weight of that specific assignment, how it's going to be graded, if there was a rubric, and so forth. Do y'all have anything you want to add to this slide?
I just felt like the teacher played a bigger part in it than the case study actually said, as far as responsibility. I just felt like that the teacher needed to, and that thing about plagiarism came from me, was I really feel like teachers need to make sure that their students, when they're given a project or an assignment, that she has verbally communicated to them, as well as them getting a student handbook, what the ramifications are, and understand, ethically what that looks like, and what that will do for them. But like Brittany said, most of the things that we discussed were around the same thoughts and ideas that Meredith and Kaylee had.
Okay.
Something else that we did say was that the teacher could consider giving an alternate assignment or partial credit if it was redone.
Yeah.
Those were things that we said that could be considered other than just failing him. So that he, it wasn't like a one and done kind of thing.
We wanted to make sure that, there was equality built into it, so that the other students will see that, although this student cheated, he's not being treated any differently than any other student would be treated if they cheated. And that came from his family, his uncle his uncle was giving money into the baseball program. He doesn't get treated any differently than any other student who would cheat. And the loss of privileges, that could be one of the negative effects. And if it was his first offense, that was a question. Is it a pattern? So there were some things that we wanted more information on. And if it's his first offense, then the punishment may be different than when it's a pattern, because when it's a pattern, you already know that there's a different avenue you have to go down when there are patterns, as we discussed in the last class.
Let's talk about patterns. Let's talk about patterns for a minute. We need to make sure that we explore that notion. When you have an exceptional child who is displaying a pattern of behavior, it's the same thing. He's biting people, let's say. He's biting people. We're trying to determine if that's a manifestation of his disability. And so we acknowledge patterns when we're looking at disabilities. We acknowledge that. One of the things that we've got to not do when we're doing due process is we can't say we can't use that pattern to give them more punishment than the actual offense carries. Now, if there's a range, and this is his second or third time, but now I'm gonna tell you, when you go to court, when you go to a hearing, or you go to a board hearing, or you go to court on a due process case like this, they will only let you introduce priors if they are sexual in nature. Let me say that again. When you go to a board hearing with the school board, a 3-member panel, there's a disciplinary committee of the school board, 3-member panel that hears these cases. Once they've gone from the school to the hearing officer to the superintendent, then they automatically go to a 3-member panel of the school board. They meet once a month and hear board appeals. And there's a person that puts the packages together and does all of that. Now, at that level and at the civil level, the next level, if the parents don't agree with that and go to civil court, go to juvenile court, they will not let you bring in priors unless they're sexual in nature. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful.
And that's court only, Dr.
No.
Lamb?
School board hearing, when you get a hearing before the school board, and when you go to civil court, you cannot bring in priors unless they're sexual in nature. That's the only time they'll let you admit, well, he's done this 7 times. Does this one fit what he did? Does the punishment fit the crime? Does it fall within the parameters? And if the reason why you gave him, even though, like in this case, the most you can do to this kid is 1 day in school suspension, but you gave him 3 days out of school suspension based on this is the 3rd time he's cheated this year. That won't fly when you get to the school board or the court. It can only be priors at that level. Priors only kick into place if they're sexual in nature. That's the law.
So with every violation,
it's just like it's his first. What did he do this time? What did he do this time? And make sure the punishment fits that.
And once it's done and over, it's done and over, and you move on.
That is correct. That is exactly right. We have outlawed assertive discipline. Now, y'all aren't old enough to remember. That was the first disciplinary system that was ever introduced in this part of the world. Was Lee Cantor, Canter. Lee Cantor's assertive discipline. It was the forerunner to PBIS. It was a big thing back in the day, in the 70s and 80s. And basically what it said was, we don't care what he did. It's just a number of times that you have to see him. But that lost in court. I mean, we had kids serving 10-day suspensions. All they did was they were tardy 4 times. I mean, 4 tardies is different than 4 fights, wouldn't you think? But if you had 4 referrals, it was the number of referrals that mattered, not what they were. And that lost in court in 84. Remember, due process only came into schools in 1969, and people were finding their way for the first 15 years. And they kind of struck on this notion of, to make it quick and easy for school administrators, we just give the standard punishment. The kid comes in, first time he gets this, second time, and that was the whole notion of assertive discipline. It's a number of times we see you, not what we see you for. But that was struck down by federal law, by a court case in 1984. Now it has to be, now due process is, what did you do this time? Not how many times have you been here? And obviously, turning in your brother's homework is different than shooting somebody. I mean, it's not just the number of times anymore, it's what you did. So again, we can't base, well, we gave him the maximum because he's done this before, or we gave him more than the maximum because he's done this a time or 2 before. I know it says we can only give him 1 day ISS, but he cheats every week, so we gave him 3 days of out of school suspension. No, you can't do that.
He gets 1 day every time he does it.
He gets 1 day every time, but now here's the trick. About the 3rd or 4th times he does this, what should you do with this kid? You should refer him to the intervention team. Remember, it's for behavior and academics. And what we may find once we refer him to the team and he goes through the process and he don't do any better, and we may find out that he has a disability. This is a manifestation of his disability. We can't be punishing kids over their disability. If the kid keeps doing the same thing over and over again, rather than just keep ratcheting up the punishment to the only thing you got left is to, hang him or shoot him, refer him to the intervention team. That's the notion here. We're trying to do restorative justice. It's not about punishment. We're trying to get the kid to do better.
So it could be the question of, why is he doing this?
Yeah.
Why?
Exactly. Not that and again, assertive discipline was, they didn't care why he did it. That was not even a piece of it, or they didn't really care what he did. Every time he gets a referral, he gets the next, he gets this much more every time. And I mean, literally, we were putting kids out of school for tardies. How stupid is that?
I remember that.
I am guilty. I am guilty. Right down the road at New Hope at the middle school, I am guilty for doing that. I did it, but that was the system that we had adopted in this district. That is correct. In this school district that I'm in tonight, that was the one that we adopted. And it you know, if you looking back on it, you think, well, boy, that was just really dumb. Well, yeah, it was really dumb. Kaylee, you got a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you would support concerned parents and other teachers when the repeated offenses are violent or bullying in nature.
Oh, now that we didn't talk about violent yet. We just talked about tardies. Remember that was, you know, something nonviolent.
Okay, because you
like
said
that.
then it was only if they were sexual in nature, so I guess I interpreted that to be excluding violence.
Yeah, it's got to be violent. Yeah, we're now the violent you can bring in, but mostly that's sexual in nature. Most of the time, if it's just physical violence or bullying, we've already moved that kid to the intervention because that's required. You know, we've already moved that kid to the intervention piece. But that's how you answer that. That's a great question, but that's how you answer their concerns is, you know, we can't talk about this kid because of purple laws. We can't tell you what, you can't, you know, when parents come in to, man, what'd you do to Johnny for doing this? I can't tell you. But the notion here is we move those kids to intervention. That's the trick is we've moved the kind of the violent ones to intervention. We're moving the sexual ones, we're moving them more in the legal realm. We're moving them and the aggravating ones, we're trying to move them to the intervention team. Again,
I guess it's tough when the violent behaviors are a manifestation of their disability and they're already getting really intense.
Boy, that's like somebody, not only have you got the tire around your neck, somebody's lit it on fire. I mean, that's bad. And you're exactly right. That's when it gets tough, is when the violent behaviors are a manifestation of their disability. And you've got to explain to parents why that kid gets come back and biting their kid or kicking their kid or whatever. Yeah, that's when it gets ugly. That's when you're looking for some help from your EC department in your school district. That is correct. That this
And unfortunately, we're seeing more kids like that in preschool.
Well, of course you are.
It is unbelievable the number of kids we had just this school year who have a disability, who have a lot of violent tendencies in them.
Yeah, that's a growing thing in our business. And that's why we've got to take full advantage. We got to know all the different options that we have and take full advantage of them. It's almost, and I hate to say this as somebody who teaches law, but it's almost like the law works against us from having school every day. But you've got to stay within the guidelines of you know, you can't be arbitrary or capricious. You can't be negligent. You know, you've got to serve due process. You've got to do all these things. But there are, you know, theoretically, there are systems of relief out there. You've just got to make sure that you pursue them. But yes, when you have violent kids, it gets hard. But there, you do have some avenues with those kids. And one of the things that, again, we talked about last week, the inclusion model. You know, you're putting more of those kids out in regular classrooms, and you're going to have more instances. It's just probability, folks. It's just probability. The more that they come in contact with other kids, a lot of the children that we have, they not only have cognitive issues, they have behavioral issues that go along with them as well. And the more contact they can come with regular ed kids, the more incidents you're going to have. But again, inclusion was never the point of inclusion was never to be a better delivery model. It's just cheaper. You know?
Dr. Lane, I have a question. When you've done that, and I'm thinking about this year as well with some of our kindergartners, when you have done the, you've gotten into the intervention, you've gotten them help, behavior still continue and they can't go into a separate setting and the teachers does not feel supported? How do you, I guess as administrator, how do you combat all of that by making sure that the teacher still feels supported and the principal's hands are tied by law?
Yeah.
How do you, I just don't know how
Is your
you,
job to, let me ask you this. This is an ugly question, and I'll apologize for where I ask it. Is it your job is it your job to facilitate teachers every day or facilitate kids? As a school
kids.
There you go. Now, I want teachers to be facilitated and I want to help them all I can. But when it comes down to a choice of kids and teachers, I have to choose the kids because that's what the law says I have to do. There's a reason why that the law stops principals from just doing things like sending kids home or doing what we used to call therapeutic suspension. Now, if you're old enough to remember that, you know what that used to be too. We'd call a parent and say, your kid needs to go home the rest of the day. And we'd call that therapeutic suspension. You know that's against the law, right? You can't do that. But now I know principals that used to do that to give teachers a break, but you can't do that. You're denying that kid their access to public education, free and appropriate public education. Can't do that. But this notion that, you know, part of what I want you to learn from this course is you have to dispel yourself of the notion that the administrative role is to facilitate teachers. It is not. The administrator's role is to facilitate students, period. And if we can do both, then we're ahead of the game. But we want to try to support them and get teachers all the support and help that we can. But we can't do that at the expense of kids. That's not that's not what the law is. That's not what the job is. It's kind of cold-hearted. I get it. It's kind of cold-hearted. But you got to be champions for children. I can't come in every day and my number one priority is make teachers happy at the expense of kids, because to make some teachers happy, the only thing I could do is take, you know, is put a kid out of the building or take them out back and shoot them. That's all that's left. That's, you know, that's the only thing that makes some teachers happy with some kids. But that's not your job. That's not the job. That's why all these laws and protections for these children are in place, so that we don't have cases like this one that we're talking about tonight, where a teacher lost her grip for whatever reason. The teacher lost her grip and did something completely inappropriate to Bobby. Now, we're not saying that Bobby didn't deserve it. I'm not saying that Bobby was an angel. I'm figuring Bobby was a turd. But what I'm saying is because Bobby's a turd don't mean you can be too. And you as an administrator have to be the one that says, no, can't do that. We have to follow the law. Law is very clear on how much a homework assignment can count. Can't do zero tolerance. We have to give due process. This is way too much punishment. The handbook says we can only put him out, you know, in school suspension for a day. Here you are putting him out for a whole year, out of school for a whole year. Can't do those kinds of things. I know Bobby turned in his brother's paper. I get it. I know Bobby's been in pain and you behind all year long. I get it. But because he is that, but we still can't do that. Again, since 1969, kids get due process, period. You can't just treat them with impunity, do whatever you want. There is a process that you have to follow. There's a posted grading scale. You have to follow it. Has to be advertised first day of school, has to be in your handbook. There has to be a code of conduct adopted by your school district that is published and given to every child and every parent. And you have to follow it. You can't just test a kid for EC because you want to. You got to go through the tier system. And then even then, you got to do 90 days, you know, of the actual EC process. It prevents abuses. For every kid that's a pain in the behind, you know, it protects a dozen from being abused by just referring them one day and testing them the next. I mean, there's this, all these things are checks and balances in place. And again, you know, teachers that think that the principal's job is support them above everything else, you don't need those people anyway. They have to understand that school's not for them to have a job, it's to educate these kids. We have to get our perspective back again. Again, that's what we talk about, changing your lens. You know, there's nothing wrong. You've been teachers all your lives, you know, all your professional careers, but you're auditioning, you're training for a different job now. And you have to understand how that job works, how that game is played. You have to be a champion for children. All right, we're back to our slideshow here.
Okay. We continued with what we thought the principal should do, but this isn't really what the principal should do, since our interpretation of the case study is not exactly what the case study was. But one thing that we did say that we haven't talked about is that there should be discussions between the coaches and the teachers to make sure that their students are doing their work. And I think that's the practice in most high schools. In middle schools, I'm not 100% positive, but I think that coaches should communicate with the teachers of their athletes to make sure their athletes are on track. And I know most grading policies or most student handbooks say something about, having passing grades to be able to participate in school sports. So that was one thing we said. Bobby mentioned the reason that he cheated was because he didn't have time to do the assignment due to baseball. And so if the teacher and the coach had communicated, maybe Bobby wouldn't have felt so overwhelmed, or, maybe that the coach is over practicing them. So kind of figuring out what's going on with why Bobby felt like he didn't have any time.
And we also felt that that the teacher, Miss Barton, kind of skipped a step in the organizational chart and went above the principal and should have gone to the principal instead of directly to the dean. So, the principal needs to double back and discuss with the teacher the organizational chart and the steps she should take when there are issues that go on in her classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ready for the next one?
Mm-hmm. So this was the issues of the due process that we were talking about. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So I just put in here the definition of what we were talking about is the principle allowing the courts to prevent the the interference of the fundamental rights of what was going on. So how this pertains to the case was that the principal, the dean, and the union rep needed to go back to the student handbook, because Molly Scott, the union rep, reminded them that the mom signed the letter indicating her awareness of what would happen if he did cheat. And so that was our interpretation of him with the due process in this case.
Now, remembering North and South Carolina or not, they don't recognize teacher unions. They're right to work states. But let's assume for a moment that were not the case. Would the union representative have a seat at the table in any of these negotiations?
Not in North Carolina or South Carolina.
No, they would not. And even in a union state, they would not have a seat at the table. Why wouldn't they?
Because you pay them, right? Because they cover it for you. They're not there. They're like in the background.
That is correct. They couldn't be there because of FERPA laws. It would not be appropriate. They can't, even in union states, union reps can't come in on due process cases, on disciplinary cases for kids. They can't. They're only there to protect the rights, the due process rights of the teacher. They can't be involved in the disciplinary piece for Bobby at all. Even in a union state, they can't be.
So then is Molly not following her own laws?
No. Molly is, has done something inappropriate and illegal and is trying to get legal cover from her union. Now, in real life, as soon as the union found out what Molly did, how many laws she broke, would they be supporting Molly? That would be a no. But Molly is trying to use them as a threat in this case because she has broken multiple laws, both federal, state, and local board policy. She's hit the trifecta here. What federal law did she break? Office of Civil
Or-
Rights, due process, and OCR on zero tolerance. What state law did she break? She counted homework assignment more than the state allows. What local policy gave more punishment than the code of conduct allowed? She violated all three. Then she ran to her union rep to try to disable her high. So the union rep would not be involved in anything having to do with Bobby. This would be to try to preempt disciplinary action against herself as a teacher. That's why she went. She knew she did things that she shouldn't have. She's trying to get legal cover from her union, not to support her in what she does to Bobby, but to keep the principal from taking action against her. Is the reason why she would go to the union. No, the union does not get a seat at the table in due process. Purple law expressly forbids me from having a seat at the table.
It just so happened that she got out, or she
All right.
maybe right here.
The issues of due process procedural requires that the policies, rules, and regulations be carried out in a fair manner. When we thought that it was a project instead of a homework assignment, we said that the school's policy was being upheld since it said that it could require a failing grade by the teacher. But that was before we realized that she was wanting to exclude him and fail the whole year, not just that one single assignment. All right, Tara.
So for the standards of arbitrary, we just went in and put in the definition. According to the Merriam-Webster, arbitrary means to come about or exist in a random or by chance. Decisions are based on random choice or personal whim rather than using reason or system. And as it pertains to this case study, when we thought, like Brittany said before the discussion earlier, we had said that she did use the student handbook in deciding the penalty, and that it was not arbitrary, but now we know it is arbitrary.
Okay, Tiffany.
Okay, same thing for Precious. We stated that it has an impulsive or unpredictable behavior. In this case, we stated that Bobby sort of showed an unpredictable behavior. We don't know if this was his first offense or not. When he decided to use his brother's paper as the assignment, and that the superintendent may have been a little impulsive by take the advice for him to be careful because of who his uncle was. And so, again, but after listening to how we should have, really looked at it.
I'm gonna have to. We need to mute. I can't hear.
I think it.
All right, you can unmute yourself now to present. I couldn't hear that last piece.
Okay, sorry. The part of the superintendent responding impulsively a little bit was the advice she sort of gave for him to sort of be careful, only due to who was sort of supporting their school as far as the baseball team and the money that he had put into it. But she did state that he had a right to sort of do whatever he wanted to do as principal, but she was telling him to be a little careful.
Why did he say he had the right to do what he wanted to as principal? What law gave him the right to determine the grade? 115C 288A. Who grades and classifies?
Principal.
Can the superintendent say, I want you, the superintendent cannot grade. The superintendent can't tell him what grade to give. They're actually expressly forbidden from doing that. And so the superintendent, all he can say is, be careful, make sure you've done all your due process, make sure all the policies are followed. These are people who have, who are prominent in the community. They have resources. This one will end up in court. You better make sure you've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, because you legally have to make this decision. I can't, and I can't tell you what to do. I'm forbidden by law from telling you what to do. This is only you. And that was good advice from the superintendent to remind him of, you better be able to support this in court. You know, you better be clean all the way through. Which is exactly, I've had that same conversation. You better be clean. You better be sure. You better have your written statements. You better have your, you better be clean. Because when this thing goes to the board or when it goes to court, you know, there can't be any gray area. You better be clean. You better be beyond above reproach here, that you've done all the things you're supposed to do. No, that's the standard. That's the standard line from the superintendent, because they are expressly forbidden by law from telling the principal what grade to assign. They cannot do that. Moving on.
So we talked about the four ethicals, and so what I was doing is to talk about the justice, and like Meredith talked about before. But what we talked about with the relates to this case is the fairness amongst the scholars and players needs to be across the board, not just because this certain player has a connection.
Right.
And then the justice had to be proved by the student handbook, and that the equity had to be up for question with his connection with the school board and being with this sports player. If another student without any of these connections on a sports team, would they receive the same punishment, or is there any connection within that realm?
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. For care, we said it does relate to this case, since we're looking at loyalty and trust, concern and connection, and then also like the relationships. We said, you know, if the teacher were to be following the handbook correctly, then the principal would need to make sure that he is supporting her in her decision to follow the handbook and support the handbook. However, we know that she has gone, you know, over and beyond and is not following the handbook. She's assigning punishments that are too harsh for the action. But we also said, you know, whatever they do with Bobby in this situation is going to impact their relationship with Bobby, but also with other students. So they need to make sure that they are building those relationships and supporting whatever they have in place, so that they show equity with Bobby and any other student that may have also plagiarized in this situation.
Okay, and then with critique, that we should not allow people in the community to influence the actions that one might take. It shouldn't matter who necessarily sits on the board or who, where the influence is coming from. We felt like the teacher used her power in a way that could be considered harmful. That guidelines, you may have guidelines, however, you have to look at each individual situation. It's not this cookie cutter approach that we should have. The social class part, Bob's uncle sort of allows him to, because he sponsored a baseball team, is why, you know, it's decided whether he should receive this punishment or not, because they're afraid of sort of losing maybe the scholarship or the sponsorship that they have. And, you know, infringing on human rights by allowing a single individual for lesser punishment than the rest. So sort of just making sure that that all the rights are across the board.
Tara?
You're muted, Tara.
Sorry about that. So under profession as we thought it related, Ms. Barton is holding him accountable for his actions academically, although the punishment didn't meet the crime. he was still being held accountable. And in the future, the accountability should be intended to encourage Bobby to make better decisions. And this should have a positive effect on his future social and professional successes. Let's see. She understands that she should understand that the decisions she makes as a teacher have moral and legal consequences. So she must make decisions that are morally and legally sound, and understanding the laws and upholding the laws. And it's important for all the students' individual needs to be considered in promoting social justice. Although Bobby has taken on extracurricular activities, there are still considerations that must be made by the school and the school district to ensure that student athletes have enough time off the field to meet their academic obligations. And all decisions must be driven by the best interests of the students, fairly handing down punishment and penalties for rules that are broken and boundaries that are crossed will get teachers and administrators more respect from the students, because respect was part of the profession part, and parents and administrators, Board of Education members, and a community versus unfair treatment options.
All right, conclusions. We said the pros were that the teacher was trying to uphold the student handbook. We know that she kind of read differently into the handbook than we did, but we also said that Principal Tim needs to make sure that he shows support of the teacher if she is in the right, or that he fixes the behavior if the teacher is in the wrong.
This is when your mama said to you when you were little, if your friend Jimmy jumped off the roof, would you jump off too? Your job is not to show support for teachers. That's not part of the deal. You got to dispel yourself of that notion that that's chief among the things. Now, if you can do that as a byproduct, it's wonderful, but that is not your charge. Showing support for your teachers when they're wrong, when they've broken the law, that can't be your primary here. You got to dispel yourself of that notion that your primary is to make the lives of teachers better or support them. That is not your primary. That is not your primary objective. Go back and read the duties and responsibilities of the principal. Nowhere will it say make the lives of teachers better. You are to offer suggestions for instructional improvement. You're to evaluate them, but nowhere in there does it say you're to make their job fun and easy. That's not the deal. Everything is about students and achievement. And so we've got to dispel ourselves of that notion, and that's tough. That's the same way every semester with this group. It's tough. The first one, it goes against the grain of everything that you believe and you've experienced in your career, but you got to get past that part.
Okay. So then we also talked about the cons of that, losing community support of the baseball through the Chamber of Commerce, of having that connection, involving the local Board of Education, and then not having that fully support from the superintendent within this teacher, that we can have the loss of teacher and replacing her at this time of the school year, depending on when the school year was. If we know that it's wondering about summer school and him attending summer school and possibly losing and not getting a scholarship, we're trying to decide on what time of year it is. And then the loss of this career opportunity. Is he up for going further in his baseball career? Is he part of one of these higher kids that can go to the major leagues or not? Brittany, will you click to the next one? Thank you. And so then our final thought as our group, that what we inferred and we assumed in this case study is that Jane was correct in her decision, as we thought she was giving the 50 on just a project grade. And that we said that the principal should support the teacher, but now we know that that is not his duty.
Now, let's be clear here. She didn't give him a 50 on a project grade. She gave him a 0 and counted it more than half of the yearly grade.
Yes, that's what we inferred and assumed as our group of
You would think that would be okay, and as a principal, you should support
And then we wanted to make sure that the dean of students was communicating more with the teachers and coaches and having that more of collaboration to catch the things prior to it falling into this big explosion near the end, that maybe there could have been something
Again,
upheld.
Again, we have assumed the worst of teachers and administrators. We've assumed the worst of them again. Principals are required to post the grading at the beginning of the year. Coaches are required to follow the North Carolina High School Athletic, even middle school coaches, 8th grade coaches are required to follow the rules on practice in terms of length of time, how many days, and even the temperature. Can't practice baseball if it's outside, if it's below 45 degrees. You can only practice for an hour and a half a day. Again, we assume this notion that some faculty member has done something wrong here, when that's not in evidence at all. Bobby says he's been involved with baseball. We can't just assume that his coach is running them 4 hours a day. Trust me, one of the jobs that high school APs have to do and middle school APs, they have to monitor how long kids are on the field. They're in practice. That's done every day. We don't leave that to chance at all. There's zero chance that he was practicing 3 or 4 hours a day. Not happening. Just not allowable. There's too many eyes, too many cameras, too big. Every little thing is now caught by the opposing team across town and tries to turn you in for a violation where you have to forfeit a game or something bad happens to you. You better believe that you are monitored 1,000 times over on length of practice, the temperature. I mean, all that stuff. There's zero chance that this baseball coach had them out practicing 3 or 4 hours a day. There's none. At 90 minutes, the bell goes off, and then that's the end. Trust me.
That's not what's happened realistically at ball fields.
But
That's not. Students are practicing 2 and 3 hours a day.
they are on their own. That's exactly right. But it's not, and that was the problem that I had when I was the baseball coach right here at Central High School. Is we cut it off, and then they went to the local field and practiced right on. But
That
now
is
I
not
have no
happening.
control over that. But now coaches are
Coaches
monitored.
are doing that. Coaches
Uh,
are doing that.
High school coaches
Yes, sir.
that are employed at the school,
Yes, sir.
they're practicing 3 and 4 hours a day baseball
Yes, sir.
during the regular year,
Yes, sir.
and nobody has turned them in.
No, sir.
Who just tell me who's doing that?
Gifford County. Like, I can speak for Gifford County. I know it goes on in Gifford County.
No place I ever worked, and I worked in 4 districts, no place that I ever worked did anything like that ever occur. That it did one time when I was the high school principal in Charlotte. Our football coach got caught the year before I got there. He was the former football coach when I got there. You get caught one time, but now if they're breaking the law, that's on them. But I don't think that's. I think there may be a differing opinion here of what practice is and when they can do it.
I have two sons who who have played high school here in the county, and one recently graduated high school in the last couple of years, and the coaches are still there, and they practice several hours.
They practice on the school field several hours.
On the school ball field.
During the season, during the academic season.
During the school year.
During the school year. And nobody ever said anything about that, and nothing never came of that.
Nope. And I am 100% sure that parents don't know that is a law.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Parents don't know that that's a law. That's why they
Because
don't.
I didn't know that till just now.
But nobody ever gave you a copy of the blue and orange North Carolina High School Athletic Association handbook that you can Google and go online and read all these things.
Nope.
Nope. Mm-mm.
and they had your kids out practicing daylight to dark.
That's crazy.
And coaches supported that. Well, I could be wrong then, but I
Yeah.
never worked in a district where that happened. And I
Yeah.
coached and was
Yeah.
principal. I didn't, but that may be a different experience than what I had. But certainly there are rules in place that stop that, and they are very punitive for the coaches if you lose your job.
Can you tell me where that is?
North Carolina, just
or
Google
where-
North Carolina High School Athletic Association. Really easy. North Carolina High School Athletic Association has all the rules. When practicing in season, length, has all those things. That say that that we can't abuse kids and have them out for hours at a time. You get a certain amount of minutes and that's it.
And so that was part of the reasoning behind our answer about the coaches, pulling the coaches piece into it, because the coaches need to understand that the academics come first.
Yeah.
And not their seasonal record.
Okay. So
We have schools in Matthews that actually will practice on their field for the hour, but then go meet at Mara, the athletic area as well.
yeah, that's why I had a problem with that when 45 years ago, when I was a high school baseball coach, I had a problem with that. They'd leave the hilltop and go over to Rutherford Little League field and just continue on and it'd be so cold you couldn't get your breath. They'd go over there. Now, one of the reasons why we never practiced too long at our place is we didn't have lights.
Mm-hmm.
And in the spring of the year, when you start in February, how dark it gets dark early. We couldn't have went long if we wanted to. If you'll stop your share, I'll start mine. And so share screen. This is what I was referring to. Let me move that out of the way. North Carolina High School Athletic Association, see the orange and blue symbol? It has the rules for all the sports right here. They publish these, and they actually is the blue and orange book, and it has all the rules in here for all the different sports. Hall of Fame, history, sports, baseball. Has all of those, the championship brackets, state championships, seeding, the rules and regulations, detailed instructions, pitch counts. Let's see what this one does right here. Reporting playoff advancement, health and safety, heat and prevention management, heat, prevent recognition of heat, cardiac safety, tobacco products, performance, student insurance, body paint, noisemakers, filming, baseball. First game you can't play before February 28th. First day of practice, February 14th. Heat and safety guidelines, 3 games, how many times they can play a week, what kind of balls and bats you can use, pitch count on pitchers, how many they can throw during the day, double headers, number, pitch count, inning counts, number of games, rainouts, games have to be approved by the regional supervisor, seating, playoffs, admissions, how much you can charge, all these things, and they have a practice limit, which has morphed into a pitch count as well. But there's also the heat guidelines. There's also a cold weather guideline for baseball that's in a supplementary that says you can't practice outside if it's below 45 degrees. 10-run limit, state championship. I mean, you can see all these things. There's actually more to these as well, and further down in this. You should read these things. you should read these things. I mean, now this is not light reading. There's a lot of pages in this stuff, and there's a lot of different ones. And so,
Like
again,
Dr. Lamb, like you were saying before, if you're an EC kid with MTSS process, you're given a handbook in the meeting from the LEA or from the EC department. But when you sign your child up for sports, you're not given a handbook from your coach.
you're supposed to be.
Nor is there any discussion about a
Well,
handbook.
they don't want you to know things, but you're supposed to be given a handbook or at least
Mhm.
access to one. We gave them. I had shelves of them when I was a high school coach. We just handed them out when we had the parent meeting. They came in a blue and orange book. Even for that same look, you can tell that looks 45 years old. We handed those books out. We were required to give those things out. We gave those out to parents when we had the parent meeting when we started the baseball season. We handed those books out. Now, if your folks aren't doing that, they're doing it for a reason, so that they can can run some bootleg programs. But now I can't keep people from cheating and not following the law. The laws are in place to protect kids. Now, if your folks are not doing that, and if they're winning enough ball games and everybody's ignoring that, that's a community issue. Not a legal issue. But there are laws in place that protect kids and where you wouldn't be doing these kinds of things. Maybe because I worked on the hilltop, maybe we were just better than some of the other places. But when I was in Charlotte, you better believe we lived and died by that thing. You didn't do anything because you knew in Charlotte it was big money business. You were playing on Friday night on TV. You were always going to go to the state playoffs. There was a lot of money involved, a lot of boosters. You dared not do something and get yourself, thrown out of the playoffs or play an ineligible player or practice too long or do anything stupid in Charlotte, because that's the big leagues. You're playing in the 4A or 4AA league. It's real money. It's real money. You pay, you get to play on Big Friday, downtown in Memorial Coliseum, and it's televised on Channel 14, and ESPN picks it up. Trust me, you're not going to do anything where you're going to jeopardize the kind of revenue that brings in, and the kind of exposure that gets your kids. No, you don't do something stupid like that. Now, if you're out in the woods, and I worked in both. I worked in town and I worked in the woods. When you're out in the woods, now, my experience as being an athletic director and a coach out in the woods, but it was a quality high school, is we followed all the rules. We did everything we were supposed to do. We were really into that principle that we had. Tommy he was a great guy, but we tried to do things the right way. I mean, that becomes a cultural thing, but then there's places that don't do the right thing. But again, that's a political, that's a local problem. That's not a legal problem. But, the law's there. If folks choose not to follow them, that's on them. We got one more group left. Russell, you've been awful patient tonight, and Sarah. We got our final presentation. Maggie.
Yes. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that. Maggie and Russell and Cam and Sarah. All right, let's go. Uh-oh, I can't. Is everybody else? Can y'all hear me? We can't hear. No sound. Still no sound.
Okay, well, I can
Okay.
take over for this.
There we go.
Well, this is supposed to be Sarah, but this is Maggie, so I'm gonna go ahead and just take over if that's okay.
That's fine. Go.
Okay, well, we won't go over again the case study. Then we've got, again, I'm just gonna go through this pretty quickly because I feel like a lot of this is pretty much the same.
It is.
One of the main factors that courts look at in making the determination between arbitrary and capricious is whether the policy has been consistently applied to others who've been engaged in similar infractions. If there are inconsistent results, those results must be based on written policies that allow your school to deviate from those prescribed disciplines by weighing other factors such as level of cooperation, overall student history, or prior disciplinary infractions. So also what the law says in Chapter 6, we looked at due process, which just guarantees fairness for all citizens, with the cornerstone being the Fifth Amendment. And we talked a lot about process. So these next 3 slides are Russell's.
Right. So just continuing on in terms of due process, of course, we talked a lot about due process tonight, but in terms of the substance, we want to make sure that individuals are following the rules and policies as they're set. And in terms of those rules and policies, they're also being carried out in a rightful and fair manner as well. So in this case, I think what we have to take a look at is, the teacher, as Dr. Lambert stated before, she probably had some issues with the student before. And so her take on it is, I just want to, fail him and leave it at that and move on without necessarily giving him his due process in terms of how the district or the school has stated, their policy in terms of cheating and how they're handling it in terms of that. So based on what we read in the case study, there wasn't any proper notices, of the charges. We want to make sure that he has an opportunity to give his side of the story, kind of tell what happened. Of course, he accepted the guilt, but we want to make sure that penalty in this case needs to be fair and impartial. And when we think about fair and impartial, the principal also has a duty as well to make sure that he is imposing penalties, or I don't want to say penalties, but imposing discipline in which is basically focused on the issue at hand and not necessarily any other outside influences that might
good or
be taking
bad.
place.
Excellent point. Good or bad.
Right. Maggie, can you go down to the next one for me? One of the cases that we looked at was Goss versus Lopez, which basically was a case in which a number of students basically were suspended for disturbance, as well as some property that was destroyed within the school as well. Those students' due process was not followed there. There was never any charges presented to the students, as well as no hearings, which allowed them to give their side of the case. In this case, I forgot the name of the student, but Lopez was the student here who basically said that they didn't do anything during the disturbance, but they were still suspended, as well as the others, for a period of time, which took them out of school, which caused, I'm sure, some issues in academics as well. So the biggest takeaway is just making sure that we're following that due process as they're written, not really thinking about any other outside influences other than what your district or your school states. This is how we handle these particular situations. Now, I think, in terms of the teacher and how she's grading, in terms of a principal, for me, I believe that this might be a time to go in and take a look at, some of the policies that are currently that are stated there. Gives us the opportunity to see that, hey, we might have some policies here that we may need to go back and take a look at, update some things, not knowing how long those policies have been in place. You know, as we know, things are constantly changing. So as everything else around us change, you know, we also need to make sure that our policies and procedures are also updating along with the changes that are taking place as well. Maggie, you can go on to the next one.
Here you go.
Let's see here. And this was basically continues on with the law. And this last one here, we looked at the state versus Ingram, was looked at two different standards, basically of corporal punishment. We have a reasonable standard. Basically, the punishment needs to be within the bounds of reason, as well as humanity. And then a good faith standard. Person administering punishment is not motivated by malice and does not inflict punishment in an excessive manner. So for us, I think in this case here, if we look at the
It fills
teachers,
both of those standards. We used to call that back in my day, a long time ago, we used to call that the reasonable man standard. We just call it the reasonableness standard now. Would a reasonable person agree that this amount of punishment is equitable to the crime that was committed? And the good faith standard is that you did this because the handbook said you should, and not because you had any malice in your heart that, you know.
right.
Now,
Right.
the teacher fails on both of these. Now,
Mhm.
please remember that code of conduct that I showed you is part of due process. Part of due process is we go through all these things and we get to the end and we make a decision. And then the part of that due process, that substantive due process that you're guaranteed as a student is, this is the parameters. They'll give me anywhere from a warning to 1 day of ISS. But that's what the handbook said, that due process, if you're guilty, that's what we're going to do, except that's not what she did. And so that would be, and so is what she did reasonable? No, it's against the law, but it's not even reasonable.
Right.
And again, so did the teacher act with good faith? Absolutely not. She violated both of those standards. But one of the things we got to remember is that the actual, even if we say the kid did it and we give him all this due process, we still have to, again, extend that due process through the punishment phase as what are the parameters? We can't just say, well, yeah, he did this and we got him dead bang and he's admitted it, so we can do whatever we want to him in response now. No, we're still bound by that substantive due process.
So I have a question, Dr. Lamb. Sorry, Russell.
Oh, you're
So
fine.
on the opposite end of that spectrum, you just couldn't do nothing.
No.
Dr. Lamb. You're muted, Dr. Lamb.
Let me unmute myself here. The issue is you could do nothing. You could say, we're going to have you redo this test and we're just going to give you a warning. You could do that. I don't think this is a generational thing, but one of the things that I've noticed is I'm by far the oldest person on tonight. That's okay. I've earned all these scars. I've been around a long time. Of all the people on tonight, it would seem to me that I would be the most old school in terms of, string him up kind of thing. But for some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's years of administrative experience or whatever, but this is just another discipline infraction to me, where teachers take this as a personal affront. This is like, how dare they? This is like, you could have peed on them and they wouldn't be as mad as cheating on a homework assignment. I don't get that. I seriously don't get it. I'm not making this up. This is just another indiscipline infraction to me. I just do whatever the book said and move on. But I'm telling you, teachers are just incensed by this. How dare he do this? Nothing short of shooting him will make some folks happy. I've had some folks that failing for the year wasn't enough. Oh, how dare he? We should expel him from school forever. I don't get that. It's just another disciplinary infraction. It's like skipping or being tardy or shooting spit wads, or it's just another disciplinary infraction. You deal with it and you move on. We try, and now I would conference with him, try to get him to understand the error of his ways or whatever. But in the course of human events, this is not a biggie that you're going to have to deal with as a school administrator. This one should not be this hard. Now, I get it that some people take cheating more personally than I do, but again, I don't think it's a generational thing because again, I'm way older than any of you. But for some reason, I don't get that piece of it. Now, I might have felt that. I don't remember what I thought when I was a teacher. Full disclosure here, I hadn't taught school since 1985. How many years has that been? I've been a school administrator since 1985. So how many years has that been? 37 years. I've been a school administrator and college professor for the last 37 years. Maybe I just disremember. Maybe it was this personal to me when the several years that I taught school. Maybe it was that personal to me, but I don't remember it having been. But maybe I just disremember. But certainly, after all these years as a school administrator and somebody who works in this is just another incident to me. Maybe it may not be to you. But that's another thing you're going to have that you got to learn to change your lens. It's not personal. It can't be personal, and that's that good faith standard down there in the bottom. That's what we're talking about here. That Russell just talked about. So appropriate for this case. It's not personal. It can't be personal. You can't take what these kids did as a personal affront to you. You've got to be able to be professional, deal with do the due process, make sure that the punishment fits the crime, and then move on. It cannot be that personal piece. If it offends your sensibility for a kid to turn in his brother's paper, I'm sorry. I hate that for you, but not that big a deal. Certainly nothing that would merit you just losing your grip over it.
So Tiffany, can you consider anyone on your committee to pull together a newsletter, and it could be one more or however you want to organize it?
I don't think that was us, was it?
Nah.
All right. Continue on, Russell. Sorry for the interruption.
Well, that was pretty much the end of mine. So I'll let Maggie take over and wrap it up for us.
I'm actually going to jump in. I had some technical difficulties. My microphone wasn't working, so I apologize to you guys.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So the chapter 8 information that you guys can see there, I'm not going to read it word for word, but if you look at the last 2 lines on there, that's basically the strongest argument against Bobby failing in the case or in the course based on cheating. The grade is punitive as opposed to representing what he's learned. But the grade also doesn't reflect academic achievement, but his behavior. It might be a better punishment to make him redo the assignment, as we talked about, and some other punishment for the behavior like ISS, as opposed to issuing a failing grade. And we actually had a situation somewhat similar to this a couple weeks before school was out. I had a teacher who was, for lack of a better phrase, on her high horse a little bit about one of the athletes. And she basically it was a group project, and she copied and pasted a question with answer selections from, I don't know where she got, Google or something. And she wanted, it was one of my players. She wanted me to bench her and also fail her in this particular assignment. And she had an A, and it was going to drop her way, way down. But then we talked and we conferenced, and she agreed that she would let her redo the assignment for partial credit. But I made it very clear that, I supported that, but at the same time, I thought it was to double punish her would not be fair.
Can't do that.
So, I mean, we support our teachers, and we try to have great communication, but at the same time, there are some that don't have the whole student athlete's best interest at heart either. And I hate to say that, but that is the case sometimes.
Yes, yeah. So like if a kid, has a ball game on Tuesday and he's suspended Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, he can't play or she can't play.
Right.
But you can't go to the coach and say, I want to do this and I want you to do something to them too.
Yes.
You can't do that. That's double jeopardy. The coach and the teacher would be in trouble. But I love that. That's why I asked you to read chapters 6 and 8. All three, the teacher violated all three of these standards. Now, North Carolina, it says principals assign grade, not teachers. Understand that. But the teacher violated all three of these bullets here. There's no way that if this thing ever got to court, you'd lose your house. And if you were a coach and you went along with punishing Bobby as well, you'd lose yours too. The only way, the only thing, a kid can't practice or play if they're suspended from school. But other than that, those are separate. You can't punish them on coming and going. You just can't do that. You cannot do that. But the teacher violated all three of these standards.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to finish up just by looking at it from the lens of the extracurricular aspect of it. Texas was the first state to enact a no pass, no play statute. But regardless, participation in extracurriculars must be based on legal and rational criteria and applied uniformly. But it's not necessarily a property right. So due process is not required to withdraw that privilege temporarily. Courts have held that up.
Yeah, that's why I said you can be, if you're suspended, you don't get to play. That's correct.
Right. However, but we just looked at it as a question, the Pinger versus Nelson, which is actually Guilford County, back in the 70s. They did rule that total exclusion from an activity for a lengthy period of time, depending on the circumstances, could be sufficient deprivation to require due process. And so we just kind of asked the sort of that question of, since Bobby will have to miss, the summer baseball and scholarships, could parents and the courts argue that due process would be required for that?
That is correct. As I said, to be redundant, if a kid is suspended, just like Sarah was talking about, if one of her players was actually serving an active suspension, then you can deny them from practicing or playing during that time, but it's just temporary. You can't say you're off the team for good or you can't play. Can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
The courts have been very consistent in that. And so if you try to deny them, he has to get due process. And we've established that his due process rights were not upheld.
Right.
So that's the issue here.
And that's it. That's ours.
All right. You did a good job. I'm very pleased. You begin to see, you're going to have to read. You're going to have to read your law book, but you're going to have to pull cases. You're going to have to dig into certain things. Now, the next one we're going to have about the superintendent, you're going to have to dig into the Leandro case. I'm going to go ahead and tell you now what Leandro is the precedent on school funding. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give you a cheat sheet here. The superintendent can't do what he proposes because the money has to follow the kids. And the Leandro finding in 1997 said that state has no duty to make sure that funding ends up equally at the end, and that districts can't do that either. They can't be moving money from one kid to another either. They can't do that either. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you the bottom line on the next case is the superintendent can't do what he says. But what you've got to figure out is why he can't do what he wants to do. What laws prevent him from taking money from one group of kids, other than it's a political nightmare, and giving it to another group? What laws say that he can't do that? Leandro is your key. It starts with that. So make sure you understand that just because somebody wants to do something that's in the position of authority doesn't mean legally they can do that. We have to follow the law. And we'll talk about the case in Chapel Hill Carborough, where the superintendent did exactly what this superintendent tried to do, ended up getting the the finance officer and herself fired and a big legal judgment against them. So don't think that people don't, and that was just before the pandemic. So don't think that people don't try to do stuff like this. They think that positional authority will pull them through. It will not. People know the law. The grandmother of one of the kids on the Chapel Hill side knew that what she was doing was against the law and filed suit and won. So, I'll leave you that. Now, I'm going to leave you with this. What do you do with this teacher? If you're principal of the school, what do you do with this teacher?
Have a
You
meeting
definitely
and have her show like her power school or how she enters grades.
Yeah, you could do that. But this really wasn't about grades, was it? Was this really about grades? No, this really wasn't about grades. This was, I see my shot to get back at a kid, I'm going to take it. Can we keep people on our faculties that do things like that? I've had folks say, well, I worry about the other teachers. They may not. Now, if other teachers support this behavior, you don't need them either. If other teachers support this kind of behavior, that's something completely out of bounds like this. This is not judgment. This one is completely illegal, immoral, unethical. This is just, I'm going to get this kid. Can you keep teachers like that on your faculty? Maggie, I'm gonna pick on you. You're in the role. Action plan, move for dismissal, or just a conference? What do you do?
I mean, I would definitely start with a conference, but I guess I'm still new at this, but her response in that conference might depend on what's next. What does she remorseful? Does she understand what she did? Is she belligerent? Is she determined? And then you go from there, but I don't know.
Her going, doing something that's this far out of bounds and then running to her union for protection to try to protect her own hide. What does that tell you? It tells you she knows exactly what she did and what her intent was. I'll just kind of summarize it for you. For me, this person couldn't work for me. Not another day, not another minute.
Dr. Lamb, I think if teachers understood the law, going through this class has been helpful, but I think if teachers, be in the classroom for as long as I have, if they understood the law, we get just the code of conduct. And yes, sometimes you read and sometimes you don't. You should know your code of conduct backwards and forward. But even knowing the law, I think you wouldn't have the challenge that you have with teachers.
But in a case like this, this is so over the top. This is not, she took the maximum that you can't even do to a kid who brings a gun. Right. And gave to a kid who turned his brother's homework assignment in. Let that settle in and think about it. And we're gonna debrief, as we always do. We're gonna debrief next week. After a week, we're gonna think about this, and we're gonna think about her. And so I ask you as kind of a rhetorical question tonight, but next week I want you to think about, what would you do? Somebody who did something this egregious, that tried to harm a kid this badly. The only thing that you could have done worse is if you physically or sexually assaulted him. That you had a teacher that attempted to do this to a child. What would you do if it was your building? I'll see you all next week. We'll talk about discipline. Everybody have a good week. Thank you for your participation tonight. Good to see you all. Good night.